Good morning, good afternoon to all, and thank you for being with us today. My name is Dominique Burgeon, and I am the Director of the FAO Emergency and Rehabilitation Division, and I am also the Coordinator of the Strategic Program on Resilience, and I will be moderating this event today. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this 5th edition of the series of monthly webinars on resilience that is taking place between May and December 2016. At the outset, I should say that this series of webinars is an initiative of the Knowledge Sharing Platform on Resilience of the Informed Program funded by the European Union and implemented by the FAO Strategic Program on Resilience. The series is co-hosted by the FAO Strategic Program on Resilience and the European Union Directorate General for International Cooperation and Development, DG DEFCO. I would like to particularly thank our colleague from the EU DEFCO C1, Rural Development, Food Security and Nutrition, as well as DEFCO O3, Knowledge Management, for their kind support in organizing this event. Allow me first to say a few words on how this webinar will be run. This webinar will last for about an hour and a half and will be recorded. A link will be shared after the event so that all are able to see this presentation again. Following the presentation, you will be able to provide comments and ask your questions using the chat box in the left side of the screen. Your microphones are turned off in order to avoid any disrupting background noise. The event will have a Twitter coverage under the hashtag, which you should see on the screen as we speak, which you'll see on the screen, KS for Resilience and hashtag UNFAO. So I invite you to follow these hashtags. Now, today's topic is on gender equality for resilience in protracted crises. Let me start with a few words on protracted crises. As you may know, the State of World Food Insecurity in 2010, which is one of the main flagship FAO publications, described protracted crises as a special category. They are situations characterized by recurrent human-made and natural hazards, prolonged food crises, breakdown of livelihoods, and insufficient governance and institutional capacity to deal with the crisis. Over the last 30 years, we have witnessed a trend where an increasing number of crises have evolved from catastrophic, short-term, highly visible events to more structural, long-term situations, resulting from a combination of multiple contributing factors. We have seen, especially natural disasters, conflict and weak governance with climate change, financial and price crises increasingly frequent among the exacerbating factors. In 1990, for example, we had 12 countries in food crisis. 5 of them were in protracted crisis. In 2010, we had 24 countries in food crisis, 19 of them in protracted crisis. Protracted crises have therefore become the new norm, while acute short-term crises are now somehow the exception. We are now witnessing the highest levels of displacement on record. An unprecedented 65.3 million people around the world have been forced from their home. Among them are nearly 21.3 million refugees, over half of whom are under the age of 18. The average length of displacement in major refugee situations is about 20 years. Over 1.5 billion people live in countries affected by conflict and violence. And it's interesting to note that 40% of fragile and post-conflict countries relapse into conflict within 10 years. The cost of conflict is also tremendous, as you can see, with 14.3 trillion globally, which is about 13% of the world GDP. And from a food security perspective, it's interesting to know that in protracted crises, we have a prevalence of undernourishment that is 3 times higher than elsewhere. This is, of course, exacerbated by the increasing competition over already scarce resources and is compounded by climate change. Addressing food insecurity and malnutrition in protracted crises is therefore for us a particularly challenging task and which require our attention and high level of political commitment. I should say that this is the background against which the Committee on World Food Security decided to begin developing policy guidance to improve food security and nutrition outcomes in protracted crisis situation. As a matter of fact, as a follow-up to the presentation of the report which I have referred to, at its 36th session in October 2010, the CFS agreed that protracted situations require special attention and that appropriate response for these contexts differ from those required in short-term crises or in non-crisis development context. From then on, a consultative, wide, and I would say very in-depth consultation process has been initiated involving all relevant stakeholders from government, UN agencies, civil society, and non-government organizations, international agricultural research institutions, private sectors, private philanthropic situation, as well as international and regional financial institutions. The result of all this has been the endorsement at CFS 42 in October 2015 of the Framework for Action for Food Security and Nutrition in Protracted Crises, known as the FFA. This FFA is a short document that provides, and it can be, I'm sure you have seen it, I have a copy with me here. This is a short document that provides a broad framework that can be used by all stakeholders who may have a role in improving or impacting food security and nutrition in protracted crises. The objectives is clearly to improve the food security and nutrition of populations affected by or at risk of protracted crises by addressing critical manifestations and building resilience. It also aims to adapt to specific challenge and to contribute to addressing underlying causes. Among the 11 principles, there is a specific principle on gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. We consider that the framework for action for food security and nutrition in protracted crises is an important and necessary step to mobilize political commitment and guide action much needed to scale up successful experiences. Many examples exist of good practices in addressing some of the issues at the root of protracted crises. What we have seen in FAO is that while gender inequality seems to be exacerbated at protracted crises, rural women have an enormous potential for building resilience. They should be seen as a partner in development rather than victims. There is a compelling evidence to indicate that relief programs that adopt a gender perspective can avert widespread malnutrition and lead to quick and more extensive recovery in food production and other aspects of livelihoods. So now, following this introduction on the background and the centrality of gender within the framework for action for food security and nutrition in protracted crises, I would like now to invite our guest speaker today, Ms. Una Mustalampi, to tell us more about FAO experience on supporting gender equality in protracted crises. Una works as a gender mainstreaming officer and coordinates FAO gender work under our strategic program on resilience. And she is also the Deputy Delivery Manager of FAO's major area of work on increasing resilience in protracted crises. She has been closely involved in the formulation of the FFA, the Framework for Action, and I think therefore is the best placed person to talk on the issue today. So the floor is yours, Una. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dominique, and thank you everyone out there for joining this webinar today. Good morning and good afternoon, wherever you are. My presentation today will be based on a guidance note on gender equality and food security in protracted crisis that has been prepared to support the implementation of the framework for action that Dominique just presented. This guidance note will be published and available very soon. So that will be sort of at the core of my presentation today. Our presentation today will be consisting of 3 parts. The first is the why, so more the theoretical part. Why does gender equality and gender issues matter in protracted crisis? In the second part, we will be looking more at the how, so the programmatic approaches that FAO has been taking to improve gender responsive food security programming. And the third part will be looking at some of the future perspectives, namely I will be discussing a little bit about the potential for gender responsive food security programming for building peace and preventing conflict. The presentation will take about 30 minutes, and then at the end we should have some time for some questions and comments from your side. So why does gender matter in protracted crisis? Overall, protracted crisis affect the food security and nutrition of enormous numbers of people, as we just heard from Dominique. They restrict access to economic opportunities. They destroy households or cause the destruction of household assets. They change the social fabric of societies. They cause a huge impact on the lives of men and women and boys and girls, and thus they also change the roles, also the economic roles of men and women. There's a tendency, we often see an increase in the number of households headed by women, mainly because it is so far more often men who are conscripted to the military, who or die or are disabled, or who migrate in search of work opportunities elsewhere. So in these situations, we see that women take on the breadwinner roles. In a recent discussion on Syria, I've heard from colleagues that what we see at the countryside is women and the elderly who are managing the farms. When women do take on these new responsibilities in the productive sphere, their work burden at home or in the community usually does not decrease. However, quite the opposite. What we often see is a tendency for the domestic responsibilities usually carried out by women and children, such as water collection and fuel wood collection. These become more arduous and time-consuming, for example, in camp settings. Sometimes they can become outright dangerous. Globally, women have less access to resources, they have less access to services and assets they would require to engage profitably or more profitably in agriculture to begin with, and this is also exacerbated in protracted crisis. It often means that their strategies to cope in crisis situations are also more limited. They may need to resort to negative coping strategies such as transactional sex or early marriages of girl children. Crisis situations can also create or exacerbate many forms of gender-based violence. The collapse of social structures, psychological stress may contribute to the increase of violence and aggression, also towards women and children. And this has also a huge impact on the agricultural sector because it reduces the capacity of the survivors, and often also on long term as a result of illness and trauma and stigma. Here are some figures from all over the world. Globally, what we know is that between 10 to 20% of all landholders are women, so clearly a minority. This striking figure, I believe, is from World Health Organization, that in some crisis settings, gender-based violence affects over 70% of women. Despite of this, the investment in gender equality is clearly on the low side. Only 2% of aid to fragile states and economies targeted gender equality as a principal objective in 2012-2013, and only 130 million out of almost 32 billion of total aid went to women's equality organizations and institutions. So far, I've been painting a rather gloomy picture, but what I would want to emphasize is that despite of all these challenges, women and girls in crisis situations show an incredible resilience and resourcefulness, and have a wealth of knowledge and skills that we should be taking into account. It's a huge untapped potential. So this is a quote from our Director General about the impressive resilience and potential that women have. So this should always be at the basis of our interventions and our efforts. Gender responsive programming is also better programming. It makes sense. FAO estimated in the State of World of Food and Agriculture report, the SOFA report from 2011, that agricultural outputs could be increased between 2.5 to 4% by granting men and women farmers equal access to productive resources. This, in turn, could reduce the number of hungry people in the world by 12 to 17%. Humanitarian interventions that ensure women's participation in economic activities were the most successful in delivering food security outcomes, according to a recent study conducted by UN Women together with the Institute of Development Studies. Over the past decades, time and again, it has been shown that resources and income controlled by women are more likely to be used to improve family food consumption, reduce child malnutrition, spending on education, expenditure on food, and so forth. So it clearly does make sense to invest in gender equality. I'm now moving, I hope that you're convinced now, and I can move on to my my next section on how to do it. And I have outlined sort of 5 steps or 5 areas of recommendations that I will be now going through, and I will be bringing in some FAO examples as we go. Gender analysis is the study of women and men, gender roles and relations and the specific needs and priorities, access, constraints, or who has control over access and income. And this is something that we should be factoring into our needs assessments before we start planning. It is a step. It is a very necessary step, but it requires adequate resources and gender expertise. Overall, there are huge data gaps on sex and age disaggregated data affecting programming overall, particularly in crisis situations and protracted crisis situations, which proves to show that it does not happen by itself without the necessary investment. I would like to share with you an example of a promising practice from South Sudan. Here in the slide you can see the cover of the South Sudan Resilience Strategy, which is a very recent document. And this exercise was conducted in parallel when the FAO South Sudan was also working on a country gender assessment. So looking at the gender roles and responsibilities in the different agricultural sectors and the institutional machineries in the country and so forth. So the team that was working on this assessment was also able to provide support to the resilience strategy. As a result, we see that there are many specific actions, gender-specific actions outlined in the strategy, and I hope that soon there will be also a possibility to start implementing these as the situation stabilizes in South Sudan. My second recommendation is related to then the gender-specific actions based on the gender analysis and building on the capacities of, well, both women and men and their knowledge for specific livelihood opportunities. These are, of course, very context-specific. There are many examples from different parts of the world that have been successful. Something that has gained a lot of momentum recently are the cash transfers, particularly unconditional cash transfers, and I would like to highlight them because I believe that they do have a huge potential also for to work as an enabler for agricultural activities. Because usually to resume or sustain agricultural activities, a certain level of capacities and resources are required. In protracted crisis situations, we may be meeting people who have very little to build back on, and who may need specific measures to then be able to take part in productive activities. So unconditional cash transfers could, when targeted at the most vulnerable households, when women being the beneficiaries, they could provide the sort of needed buffer for these households to then begin participating in productive activities and break out of the vicious cycle. When we do work with women and we target women and girls, we should not do it without engaging men. It's essential to remember that people, men and women, live in the communities and the realities that they are living with. So we need to keep everyone fully informed, and we need to ultimately, targeting women is for the benefit of all. So this is something that this message we need to be passing on as we work in these communities. And then, yes, we need to be monitoring the accrual of benefits. We need to be taking corrective measures if the benefits are not accrued by those who we target. This example that is showing now is from our fisheries, the FAO Somalia Fisheries Program, which made special efforts to include women in fisheries activities. For example, there was a measure to include women as part of the community fisheries committees. So when the program started planning workshops on boat building, these women representatives came forth and said that that actually in Somalia traditionally women have been taking care of have been working on boat repairing, and they wish to be trained in the reparations and building of this new type of vessels, and they were. So as a result, what we see now is that we have new boats that are safer, there are less accidents that happen, but also there's been a revival of a fisheries sector, providing job opportunities for both women and men, also youth. And this has been having a huge impact in coastal communities where unemployment rates are as high as 85%. My third recommendation is related to the workload of and work burden of women and girls. When we do target women for livelihood activities, we should also be considering their time use as a whole. Women bear a disproportionate work burden compared to men globally, and even more so during protracted crisis. So like I mentioned before, there are the tasks of collecting water and fuel wood, community development, and the increase in sort of productive activities. There are many good examples of labor-saving technologies, and these can be very useful when designed together with communities, with men and women. And yes, so they can assist, they can enhance productivity. There are examples from post-harvest equipment such as grinding mills, rainwater harvesting technologies, and alternative energy sources, which is also my next example. This is from Darfur, where FAO and many other partners have been working on the promotion of mud stoves since 1990. When we do target women for livelihood activities, we should also be considering their time use as a whole. Women bear a disproportionate work burden compared to men globally, and even more so during protracted crisis. So like I mentioned before, there are the tasks of collecting water and fuel wood, community development, and the increase in sort of productive activities. There are many good examples of labor-saving technologies, and these can be very useful when designed together with communities, with men and women. And yes, so they can assist, they can enhance productivity. There are examples from post-harvest equipment such as grinding mills, rainwater harvesting technologies, and alternative energy sources, which is also my next example. This is from Darfur, where FAO and many other partners have been working on the promotion of mud stoves since 1990s. These prolonged camp settings have proven to be very dangerous for women who venture out to collect fuel wood around these camps. It has also been a huge stress on the natural resources around, and this has increased the work burden of women who have been having to wander further and further away to collect fuel. So this has been behind the efforts to promote the use of improved mud stoves and improved cooking practices in Darfur since, I believe, 2 or 3 decades already. And it has made an impact. About 99% of the targeted women use the mud stoves frequently, and they report 50% cash savings on fuel and a significant reduction in the time spent to collect fuel wood. My fourth recommendation is on protection from gender-based violence. This is also related to the example that I just mentioned. By gender-based violence, we mean, or we refer to a range of abusive, exploitative, and often sexualized actions that are perpetrated against a person's will and are based on socially ascribed gender differences between men and women. Reducing the risks of different forms of gender-based violence require an analysis of the context, understanding what those risks are in a given context. For example, in Sudan or in Darfur, leaving the camp to collect fuel wood put women and girls at a huge risk, so reducing the need to collect fuel wood was a mitigating measure. Other targeted measures could include transparent systems of targeting, engaging both men and women in planning interventions to avoid backlash domestic violence, safe locations and times for delivering assistance, recruiting women as field staff, putting in place referral mechanisms, for example. Working on gender-based violence is always a sensitive issue, and that's why it is essential to be partnering with organizations that have the expertise to work on protection and gender-based violence, especially local women's organizations and women's rights organizations would be excellent partners when those exist. Last year, the Interagency Standing Committee guidelines on gender-based violence were revised, and there's a specific chapter on food security. So that is a very good source to look for further information. There is an example from our FAO. This is a UN joint program on preventing gender-based violence from northern Uganda that combined prevention of gender-based violence to livelihood approaches to enhancing livelihood opportunities through the farmer field and life school approach. So basically working with groups of men and women farmers, and also groups of youth farmers, and they are junior farmer field and life schools. The communities were getting together to discuss and to learn about improved agricultural practices, about livelihood opportunities, but the core training curriculum also included prevention of gender-based violence, gender awareness, and other aspects, and these were delivered through community-led empowerment tools. And it has proven to be a very successful project. It has been effective in improving livelihoods, providing more opportunities for the participants, but it has also increased mutual understanding and appreciation between men and women in the communities, and thus contributing to positive transformations in gender relations. Which brings me nicely to our last, or our second last slide on transforming gender relations, on the last slide on the programmatic approaches. What we often see is that the roles of that even though the economic roles of women tend to increase, they have more opportunities, labor opportunities during conflict, different types of activities that they take. After the conflict, the sort of gender roles and relations tend to go back. But when we do work in sort of post-conflict or in protracted crisis situations, what we could be doing is taking strategic actions to improve the situation so that we would not see that backlash. And there are different ways that we could do it through food security programming. For example, we could be investing in women's leadership, in women's negotiation skills in different rural institutions such as agricultural cooperatives, such as water user committees or the fisheries committees that were mentioned before. These could be excellent venues for fostering women's leadership skills in the communities. Participatory community and household approaches that have an explicit gender equality goal can also work in this way, such as we saw in this Uganda example. And we can be engaging local women's groups as strategic partners in processes where we are, for example, discussing natural resource management, land issues, land reforms, and these types of processes. My example here is from the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Dimitra clubs. This is a participatory communication approach, and it has been implemented and is implemented in a number of countries in sub-Saharan Africa. But I'm focusing here on the example from DRC. The clubs encourage women and men and girls and boys to get together in groups, engage in dialogue, and take collective action to find solutions to their mutual problems or to their shared problems. This has contributed to a positive impact in various fields, food security and nutrition, women's empowerment, community cohesion. Through participating in these clubs and discussing problems and finding solutions, women and men have become aware of many gender inequalities that they may have not been aware of before, and they have been taking action to address these inequalities. These clubs have been able to give voice to some of the more marginalized in the communities. So this picture has been taken from in DRC, in the Chopo province, where fishing is a key economic activity, but it is traditionally controlled by men. But this behavior has started to change with the Dimitra clubs. After discussions in the clubs, women had started to engage in fishing and started to fish themselves, and it has been a source of great pride. So this redefinition of women's roles in this specific livelihood has increased the fish catches and increased the household incomes. So far I have been talking only about programmatic approaches. But what we should also be thinking about is then taking these to the policy level. So we should be looking at developing policies and regulatory frameworks that promote gender equality and the empowerment of women. What is required are processes that are participatory, that are gender responsive, that consult men and women and local level stakeholders. Sometimes these local level stakeholders, like women's organizations, farmers organizations, may require specific efforts to develop their capacities to be able to participate. In order to create gender responsive or gender sensitive policies, we also require the data, the sex disaggregated data that I've mentioned before. So for this, we need to have gender-sensitive information systems that collect this data. Eventually, when we would have the policies in place, or when we do have the policies in place, the implementation is just as important. And to ensure implementation, the importance of institutions is critical. In these fragile situations, small steps are often required to take the work forward. And here I would like to refer to an example on paralegals and work related on land and natural resource management that FAO has been engaging for a very long time. For example, this publication that I've put forth here is from Mozambique, where FAO has been supporting grassroots paralegals to provide support in legal education, in awareness of rights, for example, women's rights to land and to natural resources. And it has been a very efficient sort of grassroots approach to support in implementing policies, and could be done in parallel with policy processes. So it's a very interesting example that could be surely adapted to different types of protracted crisis situations. So then, I'm almost at the end of my presentation. I have 2 slides left, and for this, I would like to reflect a little bit on conflict and sustainable peace. There's a huge momentum on talking about peace building, and we are also starting to discuss more and more the linkages between food security and peace building. So this first quote is from our Director General, José Graziano da Silva, on saying that food security is an important foundation for peace, political stability, and sustainable development. In the history of humanity, time and time again, we have seen vicious circles linking violence and hunger. So as we have seen these vicious circles, but then how can we revert these vicious circles into virtuous circles of sustaining peace through food security? This is the work that FAO is sort of embarking now. The second question is from UN Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, saying that unquestionable evidence proves that women's meaningful participation increases the effectiveness of humanitarian assistance, the credibility and quality of peacekeeping, the pace of economic recovery in post-conflict settings, and the sustainability of peace agreements. So I would like to show these 2 quotes side by side, because what we have started to explore in FAO is precisely the linkages between gender equality, food security, and peace. So we have recently conducted a study together, FAO together with the Institute of Development Studies, exploring these linkages. And it showed us a direction or several different pathways that we could be looking at to enhance these linkages. For example, strengthening social cohesion through collective action. I've previously mentioned agricultural cooperatives and women's networks. These could provide sort of a neutral ground to begin discussions among different groups. And what we have seen in many contexts is that women have also been considered excellent brokers, sometimes more neutral players in these situations. So, and many times these sort of agricultural related institutions have proven to be rather sustainable institutions, even during times of turmoil. The second pathway is related to promoting women's agency. So, for example, their roles as natural resource managers and farmers, it has maybe not been brought to the fore as much as it should have. The Resolution 1325, the Security Council Resolution 1325 and the follow-up resolutions have been talking about the importance of including women in the formal peace-building tables, but we would also like to see, in addition to that, I think we could strengthen a lot more their roles through these informal networks and natural resource management. My final point is related to restructuring of markets and providing employment opportunities for women and men along the value chains could also have a stabilizing effect. So another thing that this, or one of the important findings of this study was that there are huge knowledge gaps related to exploring these linkages, and it is an area of work that FAO will definitely hope to continue and hopefully with other partners as well. So I have now come to the end of my presentation. I would like to thank you all for patiently listening, and I'm looking forward to any comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Una. You're not yet off the hook, because now I hope we'll get a number of questions from participants in the meeting today. So as I indicated at the beginning, I would like to invite everybody to comment, to make some comments, as well as to ask questions. Typing these questions in the chat box in the bottom left corner of your screen. So I'd like to invite you to ask your questions right now. You have mentioned two quotes from the Secretary General and from the Director General. I will remember one of you, which is targeting women is for the benefit of all, which is, I think, very true, and one of the things we should remember coming out of this event today. While colleagues are coming with their own question, Una, I would like to ask you perhaps to elaborate a bit more on the partnership dimension. Partnership is something we try to promote forcefully in FAO. You have referred to the work that has been done in the context of the ISC, the Interagency Standing Committee, for example, in relation to gender-based violence. I was wondering whether you could tell us more about the partnership, for example, at the level of the Rome-based agencies, also at the level perhaps of UN Women, what type of partnership we have with them, and then, of course, on gender-based violence with UNFPA. Yes, this is one of the agencies that is most active in that area. So I don't know if you want to say a few words to that. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much for this this question. Partnerships are, yes, they are obviously foundational. I think that no agency can work alone. We do rely and we have to work together. And I think often on gender issues, it is particularly important to be working together in a coordinated approach. Not many organizations are in the fortunate position to have many gender experts, so sort of building on the experiences of others is a huge asset. We are working in Rome. We are working together with the Rome-based agencies, so IFAD and WFP and our gender colleagues. Also in country offices, FAO often does participate in the gender reference groups, and also there are many examples where FAO is working together with other actors on the ground on different gender processes. So yes, I mean, partnerships are absolutely essential. Also in regarding gender-based violence, which is also an area of work that that FAO is still developing and trying to become better. So we will be requiring support and partnerships with many different agencies.
Okay, thank you very much, Una. We have a question from Lorena, who said that you mentioned gender analysis as an important dimension of needs assessment. And I think you even referred to the example of the work we have been doing in South Sudan recently, and I'm, by the way, interested to know how to replicate that work in other contexts. But the question of Lorena is indeed, you mentioned gender analysis as an important dimension of needs assessments. Any example of FAO experience integrating it at country-level operations, perhaps beyond South Sudan?
So yes, gender analysis in needs assessment is very important. The South Sudan example was the case where this was tried. We have also been working recently in Myanmar on a floods on an impact assessment of the post-floods impact assessment, which was an exercise conducted jointly also with UN Women and some other local agencies where gender issues were prominently taken into account. We're also trying to work on this in Syria. There have been a number of needs assessments that we hope to be starting soon, and looking into you know, it goes into looking at different questionnaires and finding the expertise to support data collection and analysis of data. So there are examples, but it is an area that definitely requires further developing and further tools, and we're also willing to. We'd be happy to hear from other partners on any experience, on any successful experiences of including gender in needs assessments.
Okay, thank you very much, Una. Indeed, I think we also invite a broader dialogue, and we ask colleagues who have to provide experience and share their experience, maybe to type it as a comment, or also to provide comments after this webinar, so that we can share in the summary and enrich the discussion with their comments. You have seen also that while Una was presenting, there were a number of links that were provided to participants by Frédéric on fuel efficient stove, on Dimitra, on the publication you were talking about. So please take note of that. We have a couple of more comments, questions that came up. We have a comment from a person called RT4. I mean, which is a bit mysterious to me, but which refers to the fact that the intervention you suggest are, of course, sensible. So thank you for that. But noting that we often have to sell them as to be of a wider benefits to society. So how do we balance focus on women's rights with some of the wider benefits to family, community, and society? So it's a bit of a hard one. But maybe you can give it a try, Una.
Yes, I think, like the quote that Dominique just said, that the how did it go? Gender equality is for the when we work for women is for the benefit of all. That I think that it is a message that is quite possible to make, that it does benefit everyone when we live in a society which is more gender equitable. So from the FAO perspective, some very easy entry points is to talk about, for example, child malnutrition, which has been proven to decrease when gender equality improves, or when women have more power and or more bargaining power over household resources and income. there are hardly anyone who can oppose improved child nutrition. But also the message of the SOFA report on bringing leveling the field for men and women, providing equal access to resources, which would actually contribute to better food security overall, is another way of maybe making this message more palatable for those who have a more hard time of believing that women's rights is an important topic.
Okay, thank you. We have a question and a comment, I would say, from Janina Fischer, who is basically saying that regarding the establishment of policies, what type of policies would you recommend? How would you contribute to policy changes? From her experience in many countries, a lack of policy is not the problem, but the lack of implementation of existing one is actually the problem. And also, how can policies be helpful in fragile and conflict-affected states that have an unstable government already? So again, a rather broad question, but maybe just share your contribution, Una.
Yes, it's an extremely important question. The policy environment. Well, I'll start from the end. So how can we work on policies in these unstable and fragile situations? It's already a challenge, but I think that it's something that we still must be working on. We, as working on development, working on these on different, as the United Nations, we do have to believe that we can be supporting, we can be building institutions, we can be enhancing capacities and supporting the normative work in these countries. So it is, yes, it's very slow and it's challenging, but it is something that we must be doing. The different types of course, from our perspective, we work. FAO is more involved in sort of policies that are related to the agricultural sector, to different types of natural resource management issues. To say something, to give an example, policies related to land are extremely important from a gender perspective. So, so if we have the work on land outlined in the policy frameworks, that will already give us a huge advantage in then working on the implementation. And this was the first part of the question, which was then related to the actual implementation of the policies, which is essential. And we know many situations where we do have the policies, but it's then a long way to actually seeing the impact on the ground. And these are, yes, they cannot be looked at in isolation. The policy processes should be looking at developing the institutional frameworks, developing the capacities of those institutions that can help the implementation, putting in place measures for accountability, for example, for gender issues. The example that I mentioned before in my presentation was related to the paralegals. So this is an approach, an implementation approach where these grassroots community volunteers are raising awareness of the legal framework among the communities. So it does help in sort of implementing the policy. And there, you know, I'm sure there are other examples. We could be looking into them, but these are, it's a very important question, and I also would like to engage in discussions with you on that.
Thank you, Luna. Let me make an announcement, perhaps, just to let you breathe a little bit, to say that Sophie basically is saying that there will be a gender, a share fair on gender that will be held in Nairobi, and that participants who want to share example of good practices are welcome to do so. So we will share with you a link. It will be held in October, actually, in Nairobi. So we'll provide you with more details and invite you to provide inputs for this important event. Maybe two questions also from our colleagues in Syria. FAO Syria. Basically, if you could provide some information on the assessment that is ongoing. We have actually in FAO a rather comprehensive, thorough assessment that is ongoing on damage and loss relating to the current conflict in Syria. Perhaps would be useful to say how the gender dimension will be mainstreamed in that assessment. And then related to that, they are asking to get more information on the life school approach, so which I think might be something also very relevant in the context. So, and asking who are the targeted people under the life school approach. So if you want to say a few words on that, Una would be most welcome. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. So on the Syria needs assessments, there's there are a number of assessments, and so far we have been working together with our colleagues, mainly at headquarter level, to provide support to the planning of these exercises. So I don't yet have much sort of concrete to give on the ground, but we have also been lobbying for. We do hope that we would be able to see a gender expert to actually be mobilized on the ground to support and maybe hold meetings with also the government and different actors. So this is something that I hope that will materialize. But otherwise, it has been support to some of these questionnaires in terms of making them more disaggregated, so looking at the sort of gender aspects in the questionnaires. There's a lot to do, and FAO is still in the process of planning a number of different assessments, and some of them are together with partners, so it is still a work in progress. The farmer, field, and life school approach was the second question. So FAO, I believe the farmer field school approach is, should I say, like an FAO flagship approach. It has been implemented in numerous different contexts. FAO also has an approach that is called the Junior Farmer Field and Life Schools approach that my colleagues have also been working on in many different contexts, and this is implemented in different places, and it can be adapted into different contexts. Sometimes we drop the junior, and when we talk about junior farmer field and life schools, it is mainly focusing on youth, but sometimes a similar approach has been used in more with sort of adult education. The difference to the sort of farmer field school approach is that further emphasis is given on life skills. So, for example, FAO has been working with this approach in different displacement settings to work on both livelihood skills and skills that youth may need in order for safe return. It has been used, for example, to prevent gender-based violence, like in Uganda. It has been used to so in different settings, it has been adapted to specific contexts. The target group can be, yes, it can be whoever. It can be displaced youth, it can be marginalized youth, it can be youth, depending on the context. It's a very versatile approach, and I'm sure we have material to share of this approach. They have produced quite detailed guidelines on how to implement the approach, so I'm sure that we can be sharing that with the participants after the webinar.
Okay, thank you, Una. Another comment that is shared by Eliane Najros, actually from the Social Protection Division, who notes that if men are engaged in nutrition, sanitation, and/or health issues, the communities understand much better that gender equality is in the interest of all. I think this is very important comment that is made by Eliane. I would like also to take the question of Damien Vaquier from WFP, who's thanking you for the presentation and who is asking you whether you would be aware of any solid analysis identifying differences in the way the transfer, cash or food, is used within the household depending on whether it is provided to women rather than men. You are not forced to respond to that question. We can also, we'll have the, I mean, of course, this is the dialogue we are having now, but we'll be able to provide written responses to the comments that are being asked. So if you want, we can.
Well, I will not be able to give a comprehensive answer, but thank you very much, Damien. I think it's a very important point. And it is also a question I actually made in a recent training that I attended on social protection at the Center of Social Protection in the Institute at the Institute of Development Studies. And yes, it's something that I would definitely want to follow up. There has been research done on the impacts of women being the recipients of the cash transfers, but I'm not sure if there has been a research that would have provided a setting comparing a situation where men have been receivers compared to women. But it's definitely something that we could be looking at and seeing if maybe with IDS if we could see some sources and get back to you.
Okay, so we invite you to still come with a few questions. We still have, I don't know, about 5 minutes to come up with questions. Another comment that is provided by Rosanne Marquesic. Actually, we provide an example from Sudan, where she says that UN Women and FAO initiated a study on the impact that women have on food security and agriculture. She also knows that UNHCR, FAO, WFP are also working together on SAFE, which is the safe access to fuel energy, including the fuel-efficient stoves, in IDP camps, and notes that scaling up of fuel-efficient stoves is implemented by the Ministry of Forestry and Environment. They are providing the training to the women in Darfur, she says. Another question here I see from Julia from OPCC, who is asking what's your how you actually do measure the improvement of gender relations. Another difficult one, Una. But I guess how do you take that? How do you measure progress that are being made? I mean, I guess also this may relate also to the resilience analysis we are doing through the RIMA, which was one of the subject of the presentation. Again, how do we make the link with the gender dimension in that?
Yes, it's a very good and important question. It's related to the type of indicators that we put in place, and I absolutely think that it would be important to put in to also when we measure the impact of our interventions, that we would also be looking at the impact, for example, on gender relations. There are different dimensions of gender relations that can be measured with different types of indicators. They can be related to decision making, for example, on what type of decisions are made in the household. What are women making the decisions on? What are men making the decisions on? Which are jointly decided on? So these types of indicators are used. Qualitative indicators can be used. So women's perceptions and men's perceptions. So men's perceptions on the importance of the work that women do, for example, or the other way around. These types of indicators can be used. There are a number of other ways to measure gender relations. Often you do require some sort of more qualitative tools. yes, I'm not sure if I can be able to comprehensively answer, but for example, there are also indexes that are looking at sort of women's empowerment. So for example, the IFPRI has a good one on rural women's empowerment index that FAO has also been working on. They're looking at sort of the different dimensions of women's empowerment, gender relations that can be useful also for adapting to more programmatic contexts. With regard to resilience measurement, the REMA, this is also this is an index that FAO is working on, and we are actually right now we have an expert who is working with us on gender statistics, who will hopefully by the end of the year we will have a published paper on how we can on sort of the gender aspects of resilience, and also with some advice for good indicators on sort of the gender dimensions of resilience. So it's also a work in progress, but it's a very interesting exercise. Indicators are always important, and everyone who works on programming is always asking for these good indicators, but they usually are context specific, so it's difficult to sort of give universal answers to them, but it's an interesting area.
Okay. Thank you very much, Una, for providing all these comments. And there are a number of additional questions that have come up, including some rather provoking ones, especially from Bruno Minjo, who is asking whether we should not promote, shouldn't FAO promote gender inequity program in favor of women? I mean, this is something, of course, a question. So there are a number of questions that have come up. We are not going, we unfortunately do not have time. Time is running. We do not have time to cover all these, but we will certainly try to provide written comment in the summary. I guess we'll be clustering also these comments, because there were a number of comments which have commonalities on needs assessment, on measurement, on monitoring and evaluation, on providing concrete examples. There are a number of colleagues who are asking to provide concrete examples, also to illustrate women contribution to food security and the linkage with peace building. So there are a number of very good comments that have come up, and we'll try to address them in the written package that will come with the summary of this webinar. So I think I can definitely thank you for this excellent contribution, Una. And I would like to, of course, say that we are inviting you to provide you with feedback and to potentially ask additional questions as we move on with this webinar. Also, I would like to say that maybe in concluding, to remind that in a statement at the World Humanitarian Summit earlier this year, the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon called for all stakeholders to work together to improve the lives of those living under protracted crisis. The Secretary General actually did put great emphasis on the need to empower women and girls and promote gender equality for leaving no one behind. The CFS, FFA, the Framework for Action, which we have been talking about today, obviously has an important role to play in implementing this agenda. And since the endorsement of the FFA in October 15, a number of concrete activities have already taken place. Such as, for example, I'm not going to list all of them, but such as the elaboration of a series of thematic guidance notes related to the CFS FFA principles, with the aim of directly supporting countries in implementing the CFS framework for action and building awareness among key stakeholders. Again, we are providing the link to this set of guidelines, which I believe you will find very important, interesting. Advocacy also on the CFS-FFA in global forum processes and policy dialogue, including the ECOSOC Humanitarian Affairs segment, WHS, as I mentioned, the ISC, the UN System Chief Executive Board is something that is taking place as part of the rollout of the framework for action, and especially looking at its focus on gender issues. Needless to say that FAO is strongly committed to promoting the fundamental role of women and girls play in contributing to food security through resilient livelihood and to sustaining peace in conflicts. I believe it is now time to end this event. We'd like to thank you all and to thank all participants for joining us and for their interest in this very interesting topic. As I said, there will be a follow-up. This presentation has been recorded and the link will be shared to all of you if you registered in the informed mailing list. If you are not registered, I would invite you to do so by writing an email to resilience@fao.org. I would also invite you to stay tuned. There will be a number of webinars that will be proposed in the coming weeks and months. We'll definitely try to keep the pace. We thank you very much for your interest, and we ask you to further expand the community and make sure more and more people are joining and share also their comments. I mean, questions are important, but also to really develop a sort of community of practice is very important. And please share your experience. I made reference to the Share Fair that will take place in Nairobi in October. Again, I'd like to invite you to contribute to that. We have provided the email address to which contribution can be sent. So for now, I'd like to say again, thank you very much, Una, and goodbye, and thank you to you all.